Hey, welcome back to another episode of the South Texas Power Hour. I'm here with Matthew Myers, an immigration attorney here in San Antonio in South Texas. Matthew, thank you for being here with us.
Happy to be here.
We're going to be talking a lot about immigration issues with regard to getting foreign investors. And we're also going to be talking about what is a topic on a lot of people's mind, which is what do we do when we're looking for international talent that we want to bring here to the States to work with us. And so stay tuned through this entire episode because we're going to be having a lot of rich content that you need to know. I'm excited to learn about it on those two things. But to get it started, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about you and what you do in your journey as an immigration attorney, just because we always like to talk about how'd you get to where you are today?
Yeah, so I actually went to law school because I would write business plans for fun in university. That was very weird.
It's not weird. It's weird to people outside this room, but it's not weird to me.
I would love talking with friends about different ideas that we had for businesses, and then I would write very simple business plans now that I look back, but they seem very impressive, the 20-page business plan that I created. Now for clients that are international investors, we're including a business plan as part of the process, so I'm still getting involved with that, but I shifted from, not wanting to do the business side of things, corporate law, wanting to more focus on international, dealing with different cultures, local businesses, small to mid-sized U.S. businesses are kind of my bread and butter right now, helping them through the process, especially those that are not familiar with the immigration process when they want to sponsor an international student, for example, or a graduate from a local university and they have no idea where to begin, or if someone's from another country and wants to come here, expand their business in the United States or start a new business in the United States. That's also fun, and I get to tap into my interest in international business and business itself.
Yeah, I mean, that's fascinating. People typically think with immigration attorneys, I mean, at least I had this mindset of, they just do that paperwork so you get that visa thing, so that way people can do it. But as you're saying, I mean, it takes a whole lot more to actually understand the business needs of either the sponsor or the person that's actually coming over to get the visa. Let's talk about the first big bucket, which is funding. Biggest problem for founders is they need cash. Here in San Antonio, South Texas, we've got some good resources for capital, but we're lacking the expansive access to capital that say Austin or Silicon Valley definitely have access to. But we're here in South Texas with such a rich connection to Mexico, Central South America, and so there's another opportunity here. What are those top three considerations for founders when they're trying to seek international or foreign investment? What do they need to know to try to get that investment here that maybe they don't from an immigration, some of those visa issues that maybe can make it more lucrative for foreign investors to participate?
So the two main visa category options are the L1 visa for companies expanding to the United States and the E2 visa for countries like Mexico that have a special treaty. It's called a treaty investor visa. And so the considerations are you willing to give up 50% or more equity in order for someone to qualify for an investor visa? And in certain cases, if you acquire some of the foreign company that the person may or may not have, then that can create a visa category. So thinking about that is really the main the main thing to consider. And then in some cases I see, the flexibility is what it's all about. Some cases I see, okay, well, they'll create their own company and they'll invest this percentage in mine, and then we'll create this other company, or we'll hire them as an employee of our company, but we'll partner with their Mexican company. Right. So it's all, they're all different strategies and options to get investment. And of course, what's most important to the international investor is having either temporary or permanent status to be here in the United States. And so that's
But it's not just as easy as an investor makes an investment like they could see from a VC fund here, or an angel, and then all of a sudden that qualifies them. From what I'm just hearing you say, it's a pretty significant investment of size and portion of equity that has to go along with that in order to get that for the investor to get some sort of immigration benefit to be able to get their visa.
For the most part, it has to be an active investment rather than just a passive investment of funds.
Interesting. What other considerations do you see? A lot of the capital. There's been a lot of articles. There's been a lot of now the news is dominated by other international news, but the fleet of capital out of Mexico, some of the other Central American countries. How is that working? I mean, what can you give us a little bit of insight as to what does that mean, the fleet of capital, and then what does that mean for South Texas and for us if that money's moving into the United States?
One thing that I think is important is that because of the political situation in Mexico, there is a lot of capital coming out of Mexico, and unfortunately, because our markets are so different, people don't get with the right advisors. They end up expending a lot of their capital and not being successful because they didn't plan it out strategically and with the right advisors. For example, I had a consultation the other day where someone said, "Oh, I heard that I could buy a jewelry franchise and that would be a good investment for an E2 visa." And I said, "Well, what do you know about jewelry?" And, "Oh, well, nothing. I manage a chain of restaurants in Mexico." Like, okay, well, why don't you open a restaurant? Why are you? Oh, okay, yeah, I should do that. And it's not rocket science, but it's asking the right questions, making sure that there's an understanding of how different our markets are when you start a business in the United States, when you move capital to the United States, and there is a huge volume of people looking for. Most of the time, it seems to be a backup plan. People enjoy their lives in Mexico. There's a great deal of respect in the community that they have, and so they will get a temporary visa like an E2 investor visa so that if they do need to press eject, they have that option.
I see. So do you see a lot of joint venture partnerships, I'm assuming, out of Mexico for those type of visas to be able to have this? Any sort of red flags or experience you have of maybe here domestically where someone says, "Hey, I've got this investor, he's gonna or she's gonna invest X amount of dollars." Are there ever those red flags that people need to be like, you need to kind of step back? Or what are the red flags that you've seen with regard to those situations? Because I'm sure you see that a lot.
So the main visa that I'm thinking about is the E2 Treaty Investor Visa that's created by the NAFTA, now the USMCA. And there are about 40 countries, plus or minus a few, around the world that have this special visa category. And one of the requirements is documenting source of funds. And so I had one situation recently where the investment was made 10 years ago, and it was a forgiveness of a loan to a friend who the loan was paying off a gambling debt.
Oh,
and
wow.
So it was kind of too weird of a story to be false. And so source of funds is sometimes an issue, especially because in Mexico, there are a lot of different tax strategies that are employed. And so we sometimes have to get creative with showing, no, really, it is a lawful source of funds, even though they make no money on paper. They have the successful business that's public, and that they're involved in. And so in terms of red flags, that would be it. And for that visa category, the main legal element is that the investment is substantial.
Okay. And is substantial 50%? Or because when we were talking earlier, that was the threshold.
So it's
or is it control? What is that for substantial typically?
So a substantial investment is proportional to the business, and it has to result in 50% or more ownership by citizens of the treaty country.
Okay.
So to continue with the Mexican example, a Mexican citizen investing in a manufacturing facility is probably going to have to invest millions of dollars because manufacturing equipment is very expensive.
Right.
I have a hedge fund manager client of all things that's all the proper licensures, and we created a hedge fund management company. The management company itself doesn't need that much of an investment because it's not the actual fund.
Right.
But we filed this as a change of status from within the United States, and the government doesn't necessarily understand hedge funds. So they said, hey, this hedge fund, we Googled it, and this was actually in the request for additional evidence. Public records indicate that you need at least $10 million to be substantial for a hedge fund.
Okay.
And
so therefore, it would be over $5 million they would be looking for in order to do that, but not the management of those assets.
And so the clarification is no. To manage those assets, you don't need that much money. You need virtual office works, and
right.
some computers and
right.
your expertise.
Interesting. Walk us through a little bit what that process looks like. Really just, key elements and then timeline, most importantly. Say I've got somebody that I'm working with, from that's international. What does that timeline look like? What does that process look like to be able to do that foreign investment and get that visa?
In terms of planning and doing it the way that documents things the best for your immigration attorney, you want to, and you can do a lot of these things. You can set up the business as a visitor. It's authorized by our visitor rules.
Okay.
So, you incorporate the entity, you get your federal employer identification number, you open a business bank account. Oftentimes they can't get credit cards because it's a new business.
Right.
But then you start spending out of that business bank account rather than out of pocket from your personal assets, and keep every single piece of paper.
Okay.
And so oftentimes to set up a business in a foreign country, it's 3 to 6 months at least
right.
to get it set up. And at the point where it could begin operations, and we're talking a new business, of course, you could buy an existing business or, there are other ways to do it. But once you have the business about ready to open, or say you hire a local operations manager to start the business, then that's the point where we can prepare and file the E-2 visa application. And the principal or the primary jurisdiction over those cases is the consulate because it's a treaty visa.
Okay.
You can file within the United States, but for the most part, the entire process is handled through the consulate.
Okay.
And so each consulate, each country maintains different requirements and procedures set by the local U.S. embassy or consulate in that country for the E-2 visa application. And so processing times can range from 1 month to a year or longer.
But you were just in that process. You've got, if we're going to open a restaurant here, we've got to actually get that restaurant ready to open, and the investor doesn't actually know if they've got a visa or not. So, you've got to basically be on the edge. This is not, great idea, back to your put it on paper business plan. This is actual business operations in order to get that visa. What happens? What have you seen where maybe the visa hasn't come and they're doing that operations as a way to appeal? Do you see usually the deals die or there's some sort of dissolution if the actual visa doesn't come? How do you see that if it doesn't work out?
So in a lot of cases, to the extent possible, funds are either placed in escrow or made contingent upon visa issuance.
Okay.
And that's mostly in the case of when someone's buying a franchise.
Sure.
And so that's a way to more protect yourself as a foreign investor. But oftentimes you really do, because the requirement is you place the investment at risk.
Right.
So you really do risk losing however much money you put in. And so I would say, even though the law doesn't provide a specific minimum, I would say you're going to want to invest at least $100,000, preferably $250,000, to be able to sleep at night. That it's likely to be successful at the consular stage for them to consider. Again, if it's a manufacturing plant, the investment threshold needs to be a lot higher.
Right.
But for a tech startup or restaurant, and I guess a restaurant would also be substantially higher.
Right, they've got a lot more capital outlay than a tech company, which is kind of like your hedge fund management, right? I need some computers and a space, that sort of thing, to do it. So again, I'm curious to this so if I'm dealing in San Antonio, Texas with an investor from Mexico, which consulate am I talking to?
So in Mexico, they're processed at the U.S. Embassy in Mexico City.
Okay.
And at the consulate in Ciudad Juarez.
Okay. What about European or even Asian countries out there? I'm sure China's got a whole different set of rules with regard to that. Again, back into the home country, into the consulate, you're dealing directly with the U.S. Embassy there to try to get that paperwork.
In the BRIC countries, Brazil, yep. Russia, India, China, they don't have an E2 treaty. So
okay.
They're and what's considered the default temporary investor visa is called the L1.
Okay.
And so for those countries that don't have an E2 treaty investor visa, it's an intercompany transferee. So you have to have an established business in the home country that you're expanding to the United States.
Got it.
And then the business has to be maintained in the home country. So it's not good for entrepreneurs who want to liquidate everything and make their fortune in the United States.
Right. Well, we see a lot of that, especially on the manufacturing side, right, where sales, distributorships, those sort of things, new companies, right, are placed into the United States. I mean, I've worked on those there out of Europe as well. So what you're saying is that's ways, but I mean, for an entrepreneur, that's kind of tough to be setting something up here. It's really just an extension of the company, right? Mm-hmm. Let's shift over into the workforce stuff because, again, that's another bucket, especially right now. Unemployment's probably the real unemployment, as close to zero as you're ever going to get. I mean, it's at 3%. The workforce has disappeared with COVID. And so, hopefully that comes back with more people seeking jobs. I saw an ad yesterday of HEB on one of those digital billboards advertising for pickers at $18 an hour. And I thought, wow, I mean, it is hard to find workforce and it's expensive to find workforce right now. What are those top three, and I'm sure there is a ton, but maybe that just real concise top three considerations for a small business or a founder trying to get international talent into their workforce?
Know that your options are limited. Consult with a business immigration attorney and to brainstorm what your options might be, and also know that you need to be a little bit flexible with with needing to meet demands with your business.
So let's start with the last one first. Walk us through the process. So HEB needs, workers. I'm going to use them just because, I saw the sign. Healthcare clients that I have of mine, they can't get enough nursing staff and those sort of things. Walk us through what that process looks like where they have, let's not say we're using a recruiter. We're going to come back to that. But I've identified a specific talent. Maybe I'm a tech company and I've got a coder that, is in a foreign country. What does that process look like to be able to grab and get that person here on a visa? Can you walk us through that real at a high level?
Sure. So the jobs that require a bachelor's degree, mm-hmm. Your software engineers, the considered higher skilled jobs, the default professional visa is called the H-1B visa. A lot of people have heard about that. Unfortunately, it's basically a lottery process to get one of these new H-1B visa numbers that occurs every March. And so invariably I get calls in April saying, I found someone, they're from the United Kingdom, they're a software engineer, they're great, they went to University of Texas San Antonio, and I say, okay, well, I hope they still have some time left on their student work authorization, which is typically a year after they graduate, because otherwise we might be able to get them here on a lottery if we go through the lottery process, which is relatively inexpensive to do the lottery. But the earliest start date is October 1st of next year.
Wow.
So, a lot of companies aren't planning 18 months in advance. Right.
So there's a big lead time. I mean, this just isn't, I found this person, can you get him here next week for a need? I mean, this is a long horizon in order to plan for that.
And that's the default. That's not necessarily, the case for all jobs and all people.
Right.
Fortunately, there are 5 countries that have a special professional visa treaty with the United States. There's always a treaty and there's always an exception, usually.
It's kind of like there's always a law, but there's always an exception.
Right, and everyone's like, tell me the loophole.
Yeah.
Well, it's not really a loophole, but...
It says caveats.
Right. So because of the NAFTA, there's a set list of about 70 occupations for Mexicans and Canadians to apply for a TN visa.
Okay.
And so if someone falls into that, one of those occupations that's listed on the NAFTA, then they can apply. Canadians can actually apply at the international airport or the border.
Oh, wow. Okay.
With a packet of documents that prove that they qualify.
And then they just get to walk across.
And they walk across.
Okay.
Sometimes I have people here in San Antonio. I forget where I am.
That's okay. We'll remind you.
I practiced in Austin for a long time. That drive down to Laredo, step 1 foot across, turn around, and present their application.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Mexicans have to go to the consulate.
Okay.
They're usually, for everything I'm talking about, the ways to change your status from within the United States. But
right.
That's the typical way. And then Singapore, Chile, and Australia have a visa that's nearly identical to the H-1B visa.
Okay.
But it's there's no lottery. It's readily available. They apply at the consulate.
Okay. Let's talk about recruiters because that's another. I mean, this is already pretty complex, and I appreciate because you're actually making it very simple. I know it's not simple. But recruiters make it even more complex. And I know from a recruitment standpoint, another skilled versus non-skilled. I know there's a lot of difference in that. Overall, recruiters, as a small business owner, how should I be evaluating a recruiter of any nature when it comes to finding international talent?
So I've worked with a recruiting firm in Mexico when it's come up. I've said, if you've been advertising for a year or two here trying to find someone, maybe consult with them and see what the workforce is like in Mexico. Here are the occupational classifications that fit under the TN, and I'm happy to talk to the recruiter about what works and what doesn't work, and work with them to make sure that you find someone where it's going to be sustainable for the immigration process. Along the lines of recruiters, I think especially in the current environment where labor is there's such a shortage, they're important. Whether it's in the U.S. or abroad. But what I often say is, my dad has his small business, and I deal with small business all the time, and I see the fees that my friends that are recruiters charge,
right?
Which are reasonable for all the work that they're putting in. But I often kind of think about it and say, well, my legal fees are a lot less if they find someone in another country,
right?
But I think that people are more afraid of the immigration process and being uncertain about it than they need to be relative to, I'll just hire a recruiter to find someone. And even so, to use my father as an example, he's been trying to recruit, fortunately, jobs that aren't great for immigration purposes, but he's offered all the recruiters all the money in the world to find someone, and they can't find someone. So sometimes that's not enough, and you need to look internationally and be a little bit more flexible with maybe there's a little bit of a language barrier, but not a significant language barrier that can't be overcome.
Sure. And I have clients here in the U.S. that have engaged with international recruiters. One of the things I would just put out is a lot of times these are cross-border transactions, so the risks are very different as far as confidentiality, those sort of things. The other thing that I've experienced is cultural differences. You've got people that are bringing from the Philippines or from maybe even the Middle East that are looking to come over for certain workers or communities. You can have a lot of language barriers, a lot of cultural issues. So even trying to just grab labor, you have to start making accommodations to figure those out that a lot of times business owners don't think through. They're just like, oh, well, they found me that person. Great, come on in. But it's international, and sometimes our cultures don't manage up. What about skilled versus non-skilled recruitment? What are some of the things to be aware of with those two different levels?
So I've been mostly talking about skilled recruitment and professional visa options. There are two visa categories. There's the H-2A for temporary agricultural workers and the H-2B for temporary non-agricultural workers. And a lot of times with those visa categories, there are staffing companies and recruiters that will handle that process in-house so that they can provide an employee to their client without the client having to deal with the immigration process.
Right.
And if you have a farm, then the H-2A agricultural visa works. But if you're, a lot of companies, especially, construction, they're more in the H-2B temporary non-agricultural worker. And it's lottery based. You have to identify a season.
Oh, wow.
You can't have them all year. And so I frankly don't handle those types of visas because they get expensive, they're labor intensive, and it's, again, another lottery. And it's a process that's more complex to manage than a lot of people want to get into.
Right. No, that makes sense. That makes sense a lot. Let me ask you a couple of just hypotheticals here, if you don't mind.
Uh-oh.
Let's say I'm in San Antonio, Texas, and I have found this great person. I've gone through the process of making sure they're a good fit for culture, their skill set matches. When I get to that whole W-9 and citizenship, and then it comes out that maybe they're not supposed to be here. What are the risks that we run if we are saying, well, I'm going to turn a blind eye to that and bring that person on? Can you explain some of those? Because sometimes people don't realize, the implications of that. And not to get into whether it's right or wrong, I'm really just looking at what are the effects of, hiring an illegal immigrant and not going through the proper channels. Because sometimes I don't think people realize what it is.
Yeah, and so, it starts with the I-9 that people fill out on the first day, and then by the third day they present proof that they're authorized to work in the United States and proof of their identity. And that just improperly filling that form out can involve up to a couple $1,000s in fines, just even if the person's a U.S. citizen. If you fill out the form or don't fill out the form,
right,
you're talking about thousands of dollars of liability. And then if you do, then it comes down to knowingly or not knowing,
right,
constructive knowledge, actual knowledge, where if your company's audited by Immigration and Customs Enforcement, then that can be tens of thousands of dollars, depending on. I just represented a client that got fined $100,000.
Wow.
They only brought me in after they tried to fix it internally themselves and just ended up throwing away all their I-9s and then redoing them and then
it's never good when you start throwing away things. That's usually one of the answers. Don't burn it, don't shred it, don't throw it away. That's not going to solve your problem.
And then you get into national origin-based discrimination, potential claims, and you're not allowed to verify U.S. citizens or permanent residents.
Wow.
And so I got roped in late, and I said, I could have knocked this down a lot if you'd have just involved me early when you had someone show up, someone from ICE show up to audit you.
Right.
I still ended up working that down. It was 30 or 40,000. I think they agreed to 30,000, but only if we complied with all the different programs and E-Verify.
Right.
And we said, well, what's the amount if we don't have to do all of those extra hoops? And they said 40. And I said, okay, well, let's do that.
Well, so let me ask you then, same hypo, let's go back, is, all right, I've hired the person, they've come in, they've presented their documentation to say, I'm not here properly. What action can an employer take at that point in time, or should they take at that point in time when someone says, I don't actually have authorization to work here in the United States?
Well, they shouldn't hire them.
Okay, I figured that was the answer.
If they've already hired them, then they they can give them a period of time to present documents. If they explicitly say, I'm not authorized to work, and I'm not now and I won't be. But if it's oh, I am, I just need to get you the document, then they can put them on leave. There's some gray areas there. But if you know that they're unauthorized, then you need to terminate employment, unfortunately.
So what happens if I've identified someone but not hired them? Sorry, didn't know we were going to be hypos, but let's
I like hypos. Better.
We have not. I've interviewed the person. They're a good cultural fit, and then we're having the conversation. They do the whole, "Hey, I need to tell you something. I'm not here properly." What can we do? Is there anything we can do at that point in time before we actually make the job offer?
So most of what I do, and people don't necessarily know this, but the work visas are tied to the employer, and so it often falls on the employer to sponsor someone.
Got it.
Sometimes people come with a work permit because they're a spouse of someone who's here on a visa that gets them a work permit, or maybe they have DACA, or if someone from the Ukraine or Afghanistan has a work permit because they've got temporary protective status. But for the most part, it's actually, say with your hypo, someone comes, I don't have, I'm here on a student visa, but it's about to expire, basically. Can you sponsor me? Is more what I see.
Got it.
Of course, if they're, so that would be the point where, you call a business immigration lawyer and say, here's this person's resume, here's the job description, they're from Mexico. What options are there? And then the first thing that I would do is look at the USMCA, NAFTA 2.0, and see if we can fit them under something.
Got it. So there are some potential solutions to that. So the right answer is not just try to slide them in.
Right.
That won't be the right answer. But the right answer is call Matthew Myers, the business attorney, the immigration attorney that can help you through all that. Let me ask you, just with all the the things we talked about with workforce declining, we got international issues. Kind of to end this thing, what do you foresee with regard to just immigration, rules, regs, policies of the United States that would impact us here in South Texas?
I honestly think because of the pandemic, people are more open to remote workers, and there's no immigration requirements for employing someone who's not physically in the United States.
Okay.
And so that's becoming more popular. And then I think a lot of local companies are needing to get creative to hire individuals to fill their needs. And so, one of the creative but not so creative things that you can do is reach out to a business immigration attorney to say, okay, these are the types of jobs I'm trying to fill. Are there readily available visa categories that I don't have to wait 18 months for? Or, is it an overly burdensome or expensive process? What should I be doing to strategize here? And so that's what I foresee is businesses getting more and more creative or needing to get more creative with the labor shortages. And fortunately, the Biden administration is speeding up immigration processes that had been slowed down by the past administration. So the immigration system and the processes are only getting better and better and more efficient, fortunately.
So there are solutions, and sounds like being proactive, working with counsel to figure out what those strategies are. There is relief for us, from an international standpoint. Well, Matthew, I really appreciate you being here with us. This has been great. I mean, I've actually learned a lot more, about the process. It's just not something that I do, and I partner with, good attorneys like yourself to take care of those pieces because, I know you've oversimplified it for me, which I appreciate, and it's highly complex, but it's going to become even more and more necessary here as we look for that talent. As far as you that are listening or watching us on, thank you for watching. If you could leave us a comment or hit the subscribe button, just let us know that you're getting value from what we're adding here to our community. But we look forward to seeing you guys soon. Thanks.